Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast. I'm Robert Bryce. On this podcast, we talk about energy, power, innovation, and politics. And I'm pleased to welcome James Kennedy. He is the president of 3 Consulting. He's based in St. Louis. Jim, welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk about rare earth elements today and how they figure into the energy and power sectors. Jim, I warned you, I guess, introduce themselves on this podcast. So if you don't mind, imagine you have about 60 seconds or so and you don't know anyone in the room and they've asked you to introduce yourself. Please, go.
Sure. I've been working in this sector for the last 14 years. I'm a mine consultant. I'm a expert consultant on rare earth resources, and I've tried to provide guidance to the federal government over the last 10 or 12 years to get this problem fixed.
Gotcha. So I've written a little bit about this, and I wrote about it, in fact, in my book, Power Hungry, 12 years ago. And sometimes in my career, I find like that I am repeating myself, that my career just goes in circles and I talk about the same things: land use conflicts and renewables, bird kills with wind turbines, rare earth elements. These issues seem to be, recurring. But it seems that it's clear to me, and I had a piece in the Wall Street Journal in December writing about China's consolidation of its control over rare earth minerals, rare earth elements. But we've been talking on the phone and elsewhere recently about China's control, not just of the supply of the mining, the processing, but it's also about the magnets. So if you don't mind, give us a quick overview on where the U.S. is relative to China, or the rest of the world is relative to China when it comes to neodymium, all the green elements, so-called green elements, the lanthanides. Where is the world today, and with relation to China, in terms of these critical elements in alternative energy technologies?
So yeah, this is very interesting because the United States continues to operate under the false premise that rare earths are part of a commercial market. When in fact they're geopolitically strategic materials that China manages so that it can control where technologies are developed and who gets to develop them. So like your work on this area, which I've read, the past 12 years of policymaking has been focused on getting into the game and starting rare earth mines, when in fact that's not the game at all. And policymakers like to pat themselves on the back, and so you read articles that say that the U.S. and the West are having a tremendous success because China's rare earth mining dropped from 97% to about 60%, and there's no end to the accolades for these folks. But what they don't understand is that was planned by China. China's strategy included offshoring all of the mining, the filthy, dirty mining, and the next few steps in the value chain, so that the whole world could then supply China's metallic rare earth monopoly. So there's been no progress at all. In fact, all the U.S. and the West have done is invested hundreds of millions of dollars in government money and a few $billion in private funding to start up rare earth mines that ultimately directly or indirectly feed China's monopoly, which is on finished goods.
Well, let's talk about that, because this is remarkable. When 10 years ago, 12 years ago, it was clear that China would control the supply of these elements, and it's the lanthanides, neodymium, praseodymium, terbium, dysprosium, the ones that are the key ingredients in permanent magnets in particular. I mean, this is really one of maybe the most critical application, because the permanent magnets are in wind turbines and electric vehicles. And we can talk about polysilicon, but that's a slightly different discussion. Yeah. But nevertheless, it's the key alternative technologies that are being promoted now, and in particular by the Biden administration with electric vehicles. That supply chain of the neodymium iron boron magnets The DOE recently reported it's 92% share of the global market. That's not a monopoly. Well, it is a monopoly. I mean, for 8%. I mean, this is well, I'll ask the question this way. It looks to me like the U.S. automakers are going all in on EVs, but by doing that, they're hitching their entire wagon, to really mix my metaphor, on China. Am I missing something?
No, you're exactly right. This is the irony of it all. U.S. policymakers so eager to virtue signal their desire to make the world a greener place, use various levers on private industry, and private industry takes up these signals and accumulates rewards for them. And then everybody starts talking about becoming part of this green revolution. And when a publicly traded company makes an announcement that they're going to get rid of internal combustion engines by 2050, and they're going to be all green by then, well, guess what happens? Shareholders reward them. Stock prices go up, internal bonuses and warrants and options translate into millions or hundreds of millions of dollars for officers and directors. And so the corporation is acting irrationally, because those resources won't be there when they need it. But they're only acting irrationally in the long term. In the short term, the economic rewards are instantaneous. The stock price goes up. It triggers warrants and options.
And we saw that with General Motors, right? After they announced this plan that they're going to quit using internal, they're going to go all electric. And they were making these announcements. The part that was amazing to me, as they were recalling the Chevy Bolt. I mean, they recalled every one that they ever made. And I thought, well, wow. I mean, this is your flagship product, and you can't even make one. And yet you're saying you're going to make millions. But let's jump back to that, because we've also seen the other part of this. I want to focus very clearly on the supply chain, but let me read this one paragraph from the report that came out of the DOE in late February. It said, while mine production of rare earth elements has diversified since 2012, China still accounts for an estimated 89% of total rare earth separation capacity, 90% of total metal refining capacity, and approximately 92% of global sintered neodymium iron boron magnet manufacturing. The U.S., by comparison, I'm going to cut to the key part here, produces less than 1% of these neodymium iron boron magnets, although there are plans to add domestic capacity in each of these areas. I mean, this sounds, I'll cut to the chase here, because it sounds hopeless that the U.S. will ever, in any kind of industrial policy, be able to catch up with China. Have we just lost the game here?
Okay, so that is the best report the DOE has ever written, and I've read all of them. But let me tell you how far off the market is. When they say that China's now only producing 89% of separated materials, what they're not telling you is that the only two significant producers of rare earths outside of China, that would be Lynas and MP Materials, when you measure what's going on, that number, 89%, is non-reflective. So, for example, MP Materials can't separate anything. It just ships it to China and it goes into the value chain. So
let me interrupt. So MP Materials is the old Moly Corp, right? This is the same rare earth element mine in California, in the eastern California desert, almost to the Nevada border. But it's the only mine in the U.S. where we're producing any significant quantities of lanthanides. Am I right?
This is the big theater, and you're going to watch the movie Titanic over and over, and you're going to wonder how it ends. It sinks every time. So,
and this company, just for background, Moly Corp, they bought the asset from Chevron, if memory serves. They went public, then they went bankrupt, and now MP Materials, are they public again?
Public again. They've got some crazy $7 billion market cap. I don't pay much attention, but yeah, it's crazy. And all they're doing is digging up dirt, concentrating the rare earth proportions, and then shipping it to China, and China does all the work. So going back to this 89%, Lynas is a pretty good sized producer of rare earths, but almost 80% of what they produce is cerium and lanthanum. And cerium and lanthanum are some of the only things they can separate. So when you actually X out cerium and lanthanum and all the other low value rare earths, the separation number is much, much higher. The separation number is significantly higher. And then when you look at magnets, I think they said 92% of the magnets come from China. But this is a fact. I've talked to all of the non-Chinese magnet producers. All of them still remain 100% dependent on China for separated terbium, separated dysprosium, and separated praseodymium or neodymium for final chemistry. So at the end of the day, it's actually a 100% dependence on China. At the end of the day, all the blending and final chemistry for any magnet produced outside of China comes from China. And so this is the best report yet, and the DOE still hasn't gotten that, a firm handle on what's going on.
Well, and I don't hear this, and I wrote about this in my piece in the Journal in December, that the White House had this big rollout, and you had Vice President Kamala Harris doing, putting the charge cord into the EV, and it was all very self-congratulatory, and, press release from the White House did not mention rare earth elements one time. I mean, not once. They talked about battery manufacturing, but nothing about rare earths. But let me ask the question here, because you're making a fine point here about the MP materials, and I just looked it up. Their market cap is now $9.4 billion, down 2.5% today, and today's April 6th. But you're saying that what they're producing there, lanthanum and cerium, are not really the critical elements in the lanthanide line on the periodic table. What I've heard from Jack Lifton and others is that it's the heavy rare earths. Those are the ones, the dysprosium, which is needed for these magnets to operate in high temperature, right? Dysprosium and terbium are added to the mix to make them work better under high temperature. But it's yttrium, terbium, holmium, dysprosium, erbium, yttrium, and lutetium. Is that right? Am I pronouncing that last one right? So this theater, you're calling it theater, that we're increasing the amount of rare earth production, but it's the wrong elements.
Most of it's junk. So for Molycorp, 83% of what they mine is cerium and lanthanum, and cerium and lanthanum have a negative economic value. It costs.
But isn't lanthanum used in the refining process? There is some market for that, right? Lanthanum is used as a catalyst in refining, if I'm recalling correctly.
Yes. So think about this. So this is the comedy of the Molycorp MP Mountain Pass deposit. The comedy of it all is 40 years ago, their entire business was selling lanthanum to W.R. Grace, who would use it as a catalyst for petroleum. Molycorp had no meaningful business in technology metals. In fact, the rare earth magnet hadn't even been invented yet. Mm. So their entire business was lanthanum. There were very few rare earth mines in the world, because before 1980, most of the high value rare earths were a no-cost byproduct of something else like monazite and mineral sands, and we'll talk about that later. So the thing is, Molycorp MP keeps getting money from people in the government and investors, because they tell a story about the past, and they say, hey, back in 1980, we were the biggest rare earth mine in the world. Well, that's true for 2 or 3 reasons. One reason is that most of a large portion of rare earths were a no-cost byproduct from some other commodity. So, they weren't rare earth mines. They were titanium mines. They were iron ore mines. They were phosphate mines. And they were providing 40% of all rare earths, but 100% of all the heavy rare earths. So Molycorp could say, hey, we're the biggest. But when you look at that graphic, something around 50% of the rare earth distribution was lanthanum. And then another huge proportion was cerium. Lanthanum and cerium make up 83% of the total. And back then, when there were very few rare earth mines, there was a market for lanthanum and cerium, and you could sell them profitably. Today, there's, dozens and dozens of rare earth mines in China, and there's other small rare earth mines all over the world, and they're all producing cerium and lanthanum at the same disproportion to market demand. So
they're
right
producing
now,
more. They're producing more of elements that we don't need.
That you don't need.
That aren't the critical application technologies that we're talking about for high strength permanent magnets. And that's the key. Am I right?
You are exactly right. So right now, if you go out and check the price of cerium and lanthanum, you can buy those for like $1.25 a kilogram. Separated cerium and lanthanum, $1.25 a kilogram. The cost to separate them in the U.S. or in Malaysia is about $10. So you're losing money for every single bit of cerium and lanthanum you drag out of the ground because it has a negative economic value. And the Department of Energy and the Pentagon report these resources as if they were equally important as neodymium, dysprosium, terbium, and so all the critical ones. So this is the problem. The Pentagon, the administration, Congress, they just don't understand that the entire rare earth value chain comes down to essentially 4 elements: neodymium, praseodymium, terbium, and dysprosium represent 90% of all economic value from rare earths globally. Just those 4.
Those 4 are 90% of the economic value.
90%. And
let me interrupt for just 1 second, Jim, because I'm looking at trading economics as we're talking here, and tradingeconomics.com. If people are listening aren't familiar, a great website for all pricing on all kinds of commodities. So the 5-year price of neodymium now is 3x what it was just in the beginning of 2020. And it's one of the few places where I see any visibility for neodymium prices. But clearly, if China controls the whole market, they can decide what that price is whenever they want, right? They want whatever the market will bear is what they're going to charge, right? Because they control not just the mining and the processing, but also the finished product in magnets, right? So this is all the pricing powers with China and not with VW or GM or any of these other companies or Tesla that are making all these EVs, right?
Yeah, so we're getting near the punchline of this joke, right? So the punchline of this joke is the government still thinks this is a mining issue. So they keep trying to prop up mines, and no matter how much neodymium or praseodymium or terbium or dysprosium you mine, at the end of the day, it has to pass through China to be separated, and it has to pass through China to become metallic. And until it's metallic, it really has no significant application, right? Nobody uses these oxides. They need it as a metal, an alloy, or a magnet. And China controls all of that because China has internal tax subsidies, and they're the only source in the world for these separated materials. So at the end of the day, you're right. They dictate price. They dictate everything. You can produce it. If they don't buy it, you don't have a market.
Well, so tell me about the manufacturing, because the word here in this DOE report is one that wasn't familiar to me. But it's sintered magnets, SINTERED. So these magnets, I'm assuming each manufacturer is going to have a different motor or different design for their generator, for the different wind turbines. So these have to, they're specifying a form factor of this long and this wide and this deep for the magnet that they need to fit in there, whatever their application is, right? So, but that's another part of the manufacturing, the value chain here that is very specific and is going to be hard to copy. Am I reading this right?
This is so incredible. There's over 1,000 companies in the Chinese rare earth value chain, and there's thousands of products. So I'm not going to get the number exact, but there's probably 12 or 13 different neodymium iron boron magnet chemistries, right? So there's the low end one, which is just praseodymium, neodymium, Fe, iron, and B, boron. And it comes out at a certain ratio. Then there'll be another one that's a little better that has a different ratio and it's a little stronger. And then you keep going up the value until you get to ones that have dysprosium and then terbium. And as you add those, the price of the magnet goes up 3x. And it's 12 or 13 different products. So now that's 12 or 13 different sintered products, which is essentially, a magnetic material. And that magnetic material would then get shipped to an OEM fabricator. And that OEM fabricator would take that material and then make a magnet specific for a Galaxy iPhone, a Galaxy smartphone, an iPhone, whoever else. They'd make wind
turbine or our windows are the windows in our cars depend on these same neodymium magnets.
Numbers, thousands of SKU numbers. So the window magnets and the magnets for your seat and the magnets for the motor that moves your mirror, those are low end, low margin products. Anything near the motor, anything that where there's friction, anything where there's heat, you need to buy these much more expensive magnets that have terbium and dysprosium. And then there's some really exotic stuff that uses other heavy rare earths. So it's an endless series of different SKU numbers for different applications. And so in the United States, the DOE, the administration, and Congress think that they're just going to put up a factory that says Bob's Rare Earth Magnets, and Bob's just going to pull a lever and rare earth.
Bob's Rare Earth Magnet. You're cracking me. Next to Bob's Minnow and Bait Shop, right?
Yes,
that's going
exactly. To be. It's like it's simplistic and childish. What you need is a full vertically integrated system where you have. This is the most important word, and apparently this is now a word that's circulating wildly in the Department of Energy. The single most important word in a rare earth value chain is uninterruptibility, right? And uninterruptibility means, so what if you start a magnet factory and China manipulates prices and it can't get supplies and therefore it can't deliver magnets? Well, if there's any risk of interruptibility, any risk, Ford Motor Company is not going to buy from you. They're not going to switch from reliable, low-cost China to Bob's interruptible magnet supply company, right? No way. So the only way to do this is create a value chain that starts at the resource and literally goes out the other end of the gate as a fabricated magnet for an iPhone or a brake caliper or a wind turbine. That's the only way to do it.
But the possibility here, I mean, Jim, I'm just casting this forward and thinking about the idea of, and we've talked about this before, that what China has done, and I think I'm looking for your exact quote, but that this has been a multi-decadal industrial, military, governmental policy to dominate this sector of the economy. And I think it was in 1992, Deng Xiaoping said, the Middle East has oil, China has rare earths. We must take full advantage of this resource. And that's what they're doing. But let me jump back to how the U.S. got itself out of the game, because we talked about this as well before, that through an industrial policy or an environmental policy, the U.S. effectively shut off its rare earth element capabilities. Tell us about that history.
So there's a couple pieces to this.
You've written, and if I could, I'll interrupt again. I'm sorry, the station break. I'm talking to James Kennedy. He's the president of 3consulting.com, tremendous website with numerous articles that he's written recently and ones that I've been boning up on that he wrote last year, talking about China's dominance, a 4-part series that's very, eye-opening would be the right word. But tell me about I interrupted, the history of the U.S. essentially taking itself out of the game.
Right. So the first big tragedy was in 1980, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the IAEA, which is the International Nuclear Regulatory Committee were both working on making the world a safer place. So they were very concerned about nuclear proliferation. This was, the 80s and Reagan and Gorbachev. So what they did was they changed the definition of nuclear source material, and they modified language that defined at exactly what point something became classified as nuclear source material. And they were lazy. So what they did was they basically just used the same laws around uranium mining and applied it to all mining. So what happened was companies that used to mine mineral sands, and they would get titanium and zircon and all these other heavy minerals, historically they used to also have a heavy mineral in there called monazite. Now monazite tends to have excellent heavy rare earth characteristics. And monazite typically runs between 45 and 55% rare earths. And the monazite is very heavy. It's got a very narrow range on its specific gravity. So it was very easy to essentially shake it out to get super high purity monazite for nothing. It was free. You weren't even mining it. You were mining something else and you got it for free. Well, the problem was monazite tends to have high levels of thorium, between, let's say, 2.5 and as high as 13%. And thorium is classified as a nuclear fuel. So what happens is the way they, because they used a uranium mining and processing law, as soon as you mined your titanium and pulled your titanium out and maybe pulled your zircon out, by legal definition, the remaining monazite was concentrated. And once you've concentrated the natural material, it automatically was classified as nuclear source material. The second you pulled anything away from it, it was concentrated, and by legal definition, now it's source material. So that's the same as if you had plutonium, right? That's the same as if you had spent nuclear fuel. You've got a huge liability on your hands. So most people quit mining it, and more importantly, the people that would refine and separate it would no longer accept monazite.
Because
so
and just to stop you, because of this kind of regulatory, I don't even know what the right word is. It's not a glitch, but a regulatory edict that was far-reaching without any understanding of what the knock-on effects were going to be. And so, if I'm reading you right, what you're saying is that the U.S. just took itself out of the game on accident, and it could get back into the game if we sober up and understand what's in monazite and why we need it. But this lies at the heart of the idea, well, we're not going to mine anything here. We're going to offshore everything. And now we're 40 years later. From everything we're just screwed on this because we're not going to be able to create industrial policy that's going to be able to counter China in anything like the near term.
You are spot on. I spent 12 years literally banging on the wall and just saying, look, here are resources that the United States mines every day. They're loaded with rare earths. And if you could fix this regulatory snafu, those materials could pass into the value chain. And because anything nuclear is nuclear, it's too dangerous for anybody to mess with, we couldn't get policymakers to sign off on it. We got sponsors. We introduced a bill in 2014 and 2016 and 2019. The bill would have solved this problem, but the bill could not get broad support because companies like Molycorp or MP Materials or Linus very aggressively lobbied against the bill, because our bill would have allowed all of these waste resources to go into the rare earth value chain, and that would make anybody directly mining rare earths superfluous. right? There's no reason to do it. How much rare earth is being thrown away every year in the United States? There's enough rare earths that you could economically recover in the US if you solve the thorium problem to meet 85% of global demand. 85%.
Just from the US. Just from the US that's effectively just being wasted.
You could sell this, you could use it here, sell it to Europe, sell it to Korea, sell it to Japan, and still have a tremendous amount left over to sell to China. That's how much. So I wasted, 12 years, 10 years of my life trying to get that to work. We had some really brave members of Congress who put it out as a bill, but because of the lobbying power of people representing the interest of Molycorp or Linus or some, third tier magnet manufacturer in the US that's buying Chinese metals, alloying them in the US, and then calling it a US made rare earth magnet, they were very aggressive. They very aggressively denounced our proposal. So,
and they were fueled in part, if I can interrupt here again, but it's just that the root of this, as I'm paraphrasing what you said, is this overarching irrational fear of radiation, and that there's something, right, in this thorium, well, it's radioactive material, it's fissile, whatever. But it goes back to this same issue of as low as reasonably achievable, the zero, zero exposure threshold, all of this stuff that is now hampering the growth of nuclear energy also has roots in the now seeding our energy supply chain, or our alternative energy supply chain. I won't say full, but ceding that entire supply chain to the Chinese. I mean, it's like, right, there's no rationality around any of this, and yet we're I don't know, marching off the cliff here. I don't know. Well, what saves us from going over the brink here, and which automakers should we be shorting here, I guess, is the other other question.
This goes back to the original Molycorp. I basically put together models that showed Molycorp would go bankrupt no matter what. It was impossible for them to succeed. And, some very large finance guys would put their own models together and confirm it. Then they would go out and short Molycorp. Well, Molycorp went from 14 to 70 to 0. But on its trip from 14 to 70, you certainly don't want to be short that.
Right.
Now, a huge number of investors that were making money on it knew it was a fraud, but why not make money on the fraud? I mean, it spends the same, right? And money generated during a bubble, a heightened bubble, it's always better and faster, right? And just think of the bragging rights you get. So everyone was perfectly happy to ride that bubble and then dump everything on to retail investors. And this is happening once again, so now you have MPs telling stories that, just are not realistic. And a lot of people know they're not realistic, but they will ride this. People know that Ford Motor Company or General Motors cannot go away from internal combustion engines. The materials necessary to roll out a fleet of EVs that represent 50% of all EVs sold is technically, I would say, even if you had an Apollo program and that kind of spending, I still don't think you would make it. I don't think it's possible to
meet the demand for just the commodities themselves.
Right. Well, certainly if they were domestic, right? Right now, we're on track to move towards that target with China controlling everything, right? We're mining rare earths for China. They're converting them to metals and magnets, and then they're selling them back to us. They're deciding who gets them and who doesn't. And that will be the case from now to 2030 and now to 2050, because the way China manages its monopoly is it focuses all of its subsidies specifically on the separation of rare earths, and much more specifically on the conversion of pure oxides to metallics, right? And the subsidies there are so significant that no company outside of China has ever been economically competitive. They can't be. It's not possible.
Because these are the Chinese state champions.
These are the Chinese state champions, and they get significant internal tax credits for not exporting pure oxides, for exporting metallic materials, for exporting finished magnets. That's where the money is. The rewards, the internal tax rewards inside China are for holding back any resources used to make the finished product. And when those resources go out the door, praseodymium, neodymium, terbium, dysprosium, they're priced substantially over what it costs if they just do the work inside China, right? So it's just not possible. We did reports for the Pentagon. We had corporations making magnets outside of China provide testimony to the Pentagon that it's not possible, that mathematically it's not possible. So right now we're working with some members of Congress and a bunch of industry groups like, the EV automaker group, a certain a motor company in the United States, other people in various parts of the OEM end user side of industry. These are all the people who want magnets. These are all the people who put magnets in their products. And we're trying to push a piece of legislation that will create tax incentives for the production of finished magnets in the U.S.
And do you have a bill? Do you have a sponsor?
We're working on a sponsor. We're trying to get our coalition together, and we're just finishing that up. And we're looking for a sponsor who's on the tax committee, because this is a tax bill. There's no point in creating a tax incentive bill outside of that committee, because you're just in the wrong jurisdiction.
Right.
But we are looking for a champion there. We can provide that person, that committee, those committee members, all the information they need to understand that this is not a mining issue. It's not even a refining issue. At the end of the day, China provides very healthy tax subsidies for the production and control over finished downstream value-added materials, and that it's mathematically impossible to replicate those prices outside of China and without tax subsidies. And the bill is very important, and we certainly have support from OEM end users for it. We're just trying to lock in, it may be one or more automakers, because without a sufficiently impressive voice, nobody on the tax committee wants to hear you, right?
So the end users understand this. I mean, they understand the game, but they don't want to talk about it because it's a vulnerability. I mean, because again, the Biden administration, I don't hear them talking about rare earths. I see a lot of stuff about batteries, and there was another $3 billion, I think, in subsidies the DOE just handed out to battery makers. But we haven't talked about cobalt. I want to come back to cobalt, but
yeah.
And polysilicon. But let me ask the question about you said this mathematically impossible. I've done some work based on estimates that Richard Harrington has done. He was on the podcast a few months ago. He's based at the Natural History Museum in London. He did some calculations on neodymium, cobalt, copper, et cetera, what would be needed to electrify the British fleet. By my calculations, we would need 4 times all global production of neodymium in the United States to electrify half of the U.S. auto fleet by 2050. It's something on that. Does that sound in the neighborhood?
That's easily within the realm of real numbers, and nobody knows what they are at the end of the day. But it's multiples. And so this is where China wins.
Multiples of all global output, not just a little bit. You would need, I figure, 2 times global copper production, all global copper production. We're just talking massive amounts of metals and minerals, and we haven't talked about spherical graphite yet either, which is a whole nother discussion.
So this is
I'm getting you torqued up here.
we're at the punchline of the joke. So the punchline of the joke is this administration and lots of European governments are setting these lofty targets. But someone somewhere is not feeding them realistic information, because to ramp up and increase rare earth mining in the United States by multiples requires opening new mines, requires permitting new mines, requires financing new mines. And the average time it takes to open a mine in the United States is about 10 years. It can be hundreds of millions of dollars in engineering to prove the project works. And at the end of the day, you're now at 2030. Okay, so let's just say it's 2020, easy math. 10 years from now, you're at 2030 or 2032. So if this administration in Europe meets their goals, who supplied the material for the first 50% of the fleet? Not us.
Right.
China. Right? So here you are on the acceptance curve of a new product like this, and this is where the margins are fat and juicy. And then you go to 2050, where maybe we're starting to get in the game. Now what happens? Right? Now you're getting to a mature product. Now anybody entering the game is at a severe disadvantage and margins are falling. So this, if you think about it, the punchline of the joke is all of these very aggressive agendas only play to China's strength. Because what's China's strength? If they wanted to open 10 new mines tomorrow morning, they could open 10 new mines tomorrow morning, right? We can't.
Because of the command and control economy gives them this advantage, whereas we have to litigate everything, and that we're the ability to even, mines, you name it, transmission lines, pipelines, building infrastructure or industrial capacity of nearly any kind is a fraud endeavor.
Exactly. So let's coin this new term: command and control capitalism. That's what it is. I mean, that's what they've got, and we don't. So all of these lofty goals really only play to China's advantage. And of course, in the short term, companies like MP Materials will play on nationalistic ambitions and investor greed, and they'll have their greedy hand out for every bit of money they can scrape towards themselves. But at the end of the day, they're still never going to be a player, because without this tax credit bill, they can't make a magnet competitive with China. They'll go from making money selling China low value rare earth concentrates to losing money making magnets. Well, that's a crazy business, right? So why would you do it?
Right.
You're not going to do it.
So well, then tell me the way forward here, Jim, because I mean, this is very sobering. Very sobering. And the issue has not, there's been a number of articles written about just the supply chain on the elements, but really it's about the magnets. This is the issue. It's, even if they sold us the elements, somebody has to convert them into magnets. And that means industrial policy. That means investment. That means some kind of return on capital. And at a time when the Chinese can say, well, just King's X, or we'll cut the price to undercut any competitor that would come into the market, right? Because they've done that as well on as far as I can tell, on this in this market before.
Well, that's exactly it, as we've discussed before. China looks at rare earths, cobalt, nickel, graphite, silicon. They look at all of these things as geopolitically strategic tools or weapons. Right? The United States economy and the United States dollar and the United States dominance today is built on something called energy hegemony, right? You know about this.
Yeah.
Some of your listeners will, but the truth is the United States standard of living is largely related to our multi-decades long program of energy hegemony, right? We control shipping lanes, we guarantee delivery, we turn on and off producers through regional wars. to manipulate price and supply. And that's been our game. Well, China's really a lot smarter than us. They say, okay, so the United States has energy hegemony, but what is energy used for and with? Well, the energy just goes into technologies. What if we get hegemony over the technologies themselves? So China's building a new form of hegemony, and the hegemony is technology materials hegemony. And they get to dictate who has access to these materials and where these technologies get built. This is the next step in the game of global hegemony. And the United States can't figure it out. We just can't see that those people over there could be so smart as to outmaneuver us. I mean, it's really, quite frankly, kind of I'll be careful what I say, but to believe that an ethnicity can't be as smart as you and can't outmaneuver you is called hubris, right?
Yeah.
And we have a really bad case of it here. And policymakers can't make intelligent decisions because they are incapable of recognizing the depth of the Chinese strategy. And the Chinese strategy is to strangle the entire world and to aggregate all of the technologies of the world to itself through the control of technology materials. And they don't waste their time mining them. They only put their energies into controlling them at the point of application. And this is
at the pinnacle of at the peak of the value chain where they actually go into the thing, the actual finished good. Yep. And that's the part where I look at, you know, I live in Austin, and I've flown in and out of Austin's airport many times, and many times I fly in or I even drive by at the new Tesla Gigafactory that's here in Austin, right? And they just recently announced, we're not going to build the Cybertruck anymore, which was supposedly what the factory was about.
Yeah.
But it's a massive building. I mean, just a huge, huge building. And they're putting it up in, you know, super fast time and whatever. But as I look at it and I drive by it, I think, well, that one thing right there, that building, that entire enterprise is all a long-term bet on the value, the price of a very few commodities that Tesla doesn't control.
That's right.
Am I misapprehending this?
So, no, you were exactly right. I was just on a phone call, and relayed this. And we were talking with some people in Washington, D.C. about exactly this. And they said to us, why do you want a production tax credit? They're so hard to get. Nobody likes to write production tax credits. Why don't you just do an investment tax credit? And I said to them, because if you do an investment tax credit, you'll end up with a giant empty building. Because any public corporation will make the announcement and build the building and roll out all the PR and enjoy all the stock price benefits and cash in on the warrants and options, knowing that there's a very high probability that building may never actually do anything. They don't care. It's spontaneous gratification. I said, if you want U.S. magnets made in the U.S., you literally have to provide the tax credit on a per kilogram basis. If you're not willing to do that, be prepared for empty buildings. Be prepared for another Solyndra.
Well, so let's talk about that, because I think that's an interesting point, that it's that production tax credit would be awarded on a mass basis. You have to show me. You weigh the magnets and show me what you're doing here, because we're talking about 2.5 to 5 kilograms of rare earth elements in neodymium iron boron magnets in every EV. We're talking about, for offshore wind turbines, 2 or 3 tons of rare earth elements. I mean, this is a massive quantity of material.
That's a lot of kilograms. Yeah.
That we're talking about. But
look,
but handicap it. Let me step back if I could, Jim, and just, let's zoom out. Okay, so the Australians are talking about mining more. You've made it clear that a lot of investors and a lot of people important people in automotive sector and elsewhere are recognizing this problem. if the U.S. can't get its poop together here, who is going to come out and rival China in this regard? Is it possible that it's Japan or another big industrial company or a country, or is there any other player in the international market that is really addressing this in the way that you very clearly laid out?
So this is so crazy. The Japanese government has a formal strategic critical materials relationship with the United States. And in 2018, the Japanese government formally announced to our government that they would no longer produce any new rare earth magnet materials. In fact, no more metals. And the reason for it was, quote, China sets price. China was the only significant producer of magnets and metals outside of China at that time, and they shut down for good. They do produce magnetic materials and magnets from scrap and from recycling, blah, 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 but you're not building tomorrow on yesterday's trash. That's just silly. Nobody else can do it. There's only 3 rare earth metallic magnet making companies that aren't physically in China. Well, that aren't physically in China or owned or controlled by China. Okay. Only 3, right? And all 3 of them have the exact same problem. By the time they acquire all of the inputs, including some from China, their finished magnet is going to cost approximately 20% more than a Chinese magnet. So, who's your customer? Well, you can get people in the defense industry to buy from you, and you can get some virtue signaling company to buy from you, but you're not going to be selling magnets for every starter motor and every Ford car, and you're certainly not going to be a supplier to somebody making iPhones or whatever, because if you switch away from China as your primary or exclusive supplier of magnets, there will be retribution. We have cases of Chinese retribution for even making statements about China's monopoly. There is Chinese law that has actually been written on how to sanction U.S. companies and cut off their supply to rare earths. China is got a very good and well-earned reputation for retribution if you try to develop alternate supply. So what's the point of building any magnet facility outside of China unless that magnet facility, 1, can operate at volume, right? And 2, be uninterruptible.
Right.
And 3, be equal on price. And so right now, the legislation we're trying to find a sponsor for is the best solution we can do.
But it's going to take years or even decades. And a re-understanding or a readjustment or just a sober look at the issue of mining monazite and refining monazite here in the U.S. Absolutely,
that needs to be done.
Because as I've heard you say it, we need a fully integrated supply chain. We have to go from mine mouth to finished magnets to the manufacturer. Otherwise, there's no hope.
Otherwise, all we're doing is strengthening China's monopoly. You're absolutely right. So if the legislation we're working on gets passed, there are companies with proven commercial scale capabilities that could become part of fully integrated joint ventures. They could build out U.S. magnet manufacturing capacity in the U.S. very quickly. The issue is, the adult issue is, if you want them to do that, and you want them to do that on scale, they have to know with absolute certainty that, 1, the supply is uninterruptible. And two, at the end of the day, the price is competitive.
Right.
And three, that those two things combined, they can go secure long-term off-takers. Right? Nobody's going to build this thing. Nobody wants an empty Solyndra building. Nobody wants a giant building that was supposed to make batteries, right?
So it's a sustained industrial policy which the U.S. has not had, and that is going to require a bipartisan agreement or a bipartisan understanding of the criticality of the challenge. If I'm putting it in the right terms, and you're going to have long-term buy-in with a very long-term horizon to say, this is critical for national security. Because I just want to interrupt, you've written about this as well, is that this isn't just about, stupid offshore wind turbines, and they are stupid, all of them, and onshore wind turbines and electric vehicles. This is about national defense and magnets that go in some of our highest tech defense systems, right? Our fighter jets, missiles, other things. This isn't just about alternative energy technologies. This goes to the heart of the military's needs as well. Am I misapprehending this?
You're absolutely right, but let's go back just a little bit further. Okay?
Sure.
Let's think about it from China's perspective. If China continues to control all of these key critical materials we've been talking about at the point of application, then any company who's building a new technology, has a new IP, and needs these materials at a commercial scale, for them to get those materials, they have to structure an agreement with China that guarantees them uninterruptible supply. And you know what that is? Move your factory to China. And once they move their factory to China, China can reverse engineer the entire thing. So what happens is, this is really a long-term gain about acquiring IP. This is how you sweep the whole world's IP in.
Intellectual property. Yeah,
intellectual property. We have national labs and corporations spending hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars on IP for intellectual property, patentable concepts for new products and new applications and new material science. But when you go to build them at a commercial scale, you have to have a guarantee supply. And to get a guarantee from China, the guarantee only comes with you relocating that technology, or at least the initial components of that technology, inside China. And the second you do that, you've just surrendered everything. You surrender. This is a game for them to acquire the entire world's IP. This is, as I said before, they're using strategic and critical materials as a new hegemonic tool. And this hegemonic tool is one step past energy. It's at the point where, what do you use energy for? Transportation, communication, conversion of materials from one thing to another. This all happens at the material science level. And if you want to participate in that, China's holding all the cards. And if China holds the cards, China gets to write the future, right? We all become, third world resource suppliers to China's new great, nation. I mean, I'm sure you've looked at China's 2025 project, right? Made in China 2025.
I haven't. What does that say?
Do a show on it. It's incredible. So China says all of these leading technologies and all of these industries all across every part of the economy, by 2025, China is going to lead in them. I mean, this is a very ostentatious claim, right? But go look, they're on track. They're on track to lead in every one of them. And how and
it's the 2025 plan? Is that what it's called?
Yeah. I think it's called Made in China 2025. And it's for aerospace, it's for transportation, it's for agriculture, it's for hydrocarbons, it's for energy. And they're using this platform of critical materials and good old-fashioned greed and short-sightedness of global corporations to acquire all the West technology and to get all these systems built there where a government-sponsored corporation can essentially copy the Western technology, right? I mean, it's brilliant. Here's one of my favorite.
It's the end result of 30 years of focused action. I mean, Deng Xiaoping 30 years ago, 1992, saying we have rare earth elements, we're going to exploit it. And 40 years if you count the U.S. even taking itself out of the game. But let me interrupt here again, Jim, because I want to just talk just briefly about polysilicon. And the U.S. State Department recently sanctioned imposed trade import prohibitions against polysilicon sourced in Xinjiang because of the use of Uyghur slave labor in Xinjiang. But Xinjiang's only 40% of polysilicon globally. Your numbers suggest that the polysilicon used in solar panels, is it 90% of that comes from China now?
Yeah. For certain applications, yes. Not for all, but essentially an entire segment of solar. They control around 90%. And for example, spherical graphite used in every battery for an electric vehicle, they control 100%. The list goes on, and they just keep capturing the market segments of today and tomorrow that are going to matter. They move themselves to the very end of that downstream value chain so that they get all the benefits. And it's a very successful strategy. In the United States, our strategy, we don't have a strategy. I mean, there is no strategy. The strategy is the market always wins. Free markets are a miracle of the West, and we'll have blind faith in them, while Rome burns. It's just, people can't accept the fact that China has essentially put a new economic paradigm in motion, and that if you're not going to play at their level, you're going to leave the field. I would say it's something like letting men get on the women's swim team. How's that going to work?
Once
you have three men competing in the women's swim team, then they're going to get first, second, and third, right? And you won't even know about a woman competing until you give a fourth or a fifth place. So this is what's going on. They've just changed the game. The game has changed. They're playing for everything. And it's geopolitical, it's strategic, and it's all encompassing. They don't want more. This is the thing people don't understand. Like any billionaire you'll ever meet, he doesn't want more. He wants all of it. They all want all of it, right? It'll never stop. It's a disease. China's disease is, I kind of get it for China, but it's a pathology. Money's a pathology. For China, you need to think about deep, deep history. Sure, they want it all, but they kind of have a reason. So every Chinese person, and certainly everyone in the Communist Party, remember the Opium Wars as if they were yesterday, right?
That this is the humiliation of China that now is going to be its payback time, and this is how it's going to manifest itself.
If you can't understand that and accept that as a serious motivator, then you will never understand China. I mean, think about this. The country of England, the United Kingdom, was the world's biggest drug dealer at gunpoint. Hundreds of millions of Chinese people perished. They lost generations to opium, and the humiliation lives with these people like it was yesterday. So not only do they want to win, but they want to win and they want to set the balance right. So it's very deep, and the United States is just not prepared to think at that level.
There was an interesting piece, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal today, or I think it was maybe yesterday, about the U.S. Navy and the shrinking U.S. Navy, and at the same time the Chinese Navy is growing dramatically, which is a different. I've had Greg Easterbrook was on the podcast talking about this in his very good new book, the Blue Age. But just a couple of last things, Jim. We've been talking for now an hour, and I don't want to keep you, but I can't help but mention that the Biden administration recently canceled 2 federal leases for the Twin Metals mine in Minnesota, which was going to produce copper, nickel, and other metals. It's just part of the pathology that we've been talking about. This inability to think long term and strategically when it comes to getting metals out of the ground.
Sure, sure. But yeah, that's all true. But there's actually another level to it, which is even more repugnant. So who is out there protesting against this mine? The virtue signalers who already own their Tesla, right? Think about how grotesque that is.
Yeah.
Right? Because think about that. They're winning in the virtue signaling realm, and now they use their energy to prevent somebody like you from moving to their level. It's a sickness. All of it is a sickness.
Well, let me ask you then, and I'm going to wind up here. So I asked you before. I know we were what you're reading, and if I recall, Yuval Harari. You're reading. That's one of the books that you had on your bookshelf or your top of your reading your nightstand.
Oh yeah, I loved it. It was one of my favorite books, and then of course I saw him hanging out with what's his name from the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, and I'm like, oh, for God's sake. So yeah, it's interesting. I sent you a little video clip on that, but we're moving into a realm where there are people who imagine a future where humans are a little bit less than human, and these are the same people that obsess over virtue signaling and being part of the right hive. Not even tribes anymore. People think like hives at this point. You know what I'm talking about. It's very scary. But fantastic book. But I'm a little bit concerned that he may be fraternizing with the World Economic Forum guys and Klaus Schwab, who is looking for an enlightened day when choices aren't what they used to be.
Well, so let me ask you this, because I mean, this has been sobering, and we've chatted a couple times now over the last few weeks, and I'm reading your articles. It's a sobering kind of look at the world and where we are in terms of industrial policy, military, automotive, transportation, mobility. What makes are you optimistic? I asked the question, what gives you hope, or what makes you optimistic? And one of the Simon Irish said, he used to work on Wall Street. He said, on Wall Street, there are two kinds of hope: Bob hope and no hope. Well, so are you hopeful for the future? You've been pretty pessimistic thus far.
Well, let's put it this way. I have two wonderful daughters, so maybe I'm just desperate. This thing has to get fixed, right? My very closest colleague has no kids, and he's as equally invested as I am. So having children isn't the only thing, but there is something that drives me to push solutions on our government. If we could just crack the door open, or as my partner on all these efforts, John Kutch with the Thorium Energy Alliance, as he always used to say, it's like a giant boulder on a hill, and you just have to remove a little pebble that's preventing it from rolling downhill. But removing that pebble is really difficult and a little bit dangerous. But we're doing the work. It's just, how do you convince a policymaker to do something like we're asking with the tax credits when another corporation that is funded by the Chinese government and is feeding the Chinese government's monopolies, I shouldn't say Chinese government, is funded by a Chinese corporation and is feeding their monopoly, who will openly lobby against you, right? Yeah. These are the problems, right? So in our free society, it's a little too free, and no one differentiates between the voice of an American worker, or American factory owner, and an American factory owner whose only customer now is China, and that's where all their profits come from. So nobody really differentiates. So if your livelihood is dependent on China's long-term geopolitical strategies, you have the same access. In fact, I can guarantee you have better access to these same policymakers than I do. And they don't differentiate. They really just pretend as if everybody's voice is equal, but if somebody attaches a check to it and a campaign donation, his voice is more equal, right?
Right.
These are the problems. We're doing our best to fix them. If anybody wanted to support the work I'm doing, I work very closely with the Thorium Energy Alliance, and any support you give there supports this work too. But it's a challenge, and I'm Irish, so I'm too stupid to give up. Right? There's no fight we won't. Right? Show me the Jolly Green Giant, I'll take him on tomorrow. There's not a fight I don't like, but maybe that's part of it. But we really do our best. We really appreciate you giving a voice to these issues. They're very important, and I can tell from what I've read in our conversations that your motivations are very much like mine. There was a wonderful country called America. It had unbelievable promise, and I'd like to go back and visit that country. I'd like to make that country whole again. Very important.
Well, we'll stop on that note. My guest has been James Kennedy. He's the president at 3consulting.com. You can find him on that on the web, on the Google, 3 spelled out consulting.com. Jim, thanks a million for being on the Power Hungry podcast. We'll do this again in a few months with some updates, and keep me posted on the progress on this legislation, because we need to do something. The U.S. has been outmaneuvered here, and we're going to need more robust government policy in a lot of realms, I think, now in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and other issues. But we'll leave it there. So,
all right. Thank you so much.
Thanks again. Thanks to all of you in podcast land for tuning in and wasting another hour, as Click and Clack on the Tappet Brothers used to say, wasting another reasonably valuable hour of your time on the Power Hungry podcast. Leave us a good review on wherever platform that you're listening. You can also find us on YouTube, of course. And until then, tune into the next episode of the Power Hungry podcast. Thanks.
Thank you.